For many of us, mindfulness is the basic Buddhist practice. What do we do? Well, when we sit down on our chair or cushion, perhaps on the floor, we follow the breath. We watch the breath come in, we watch the breath go out in a non-judgmental way, not judging what arises in the mind. Indeed, as thoughts or feelings or sensations arise, we let them go and return once again non-judgmentally to the breath. This is a bedrock Buddhist practice, but there's so much more to mindfulness than this. In what follows, I'll be using Bhante Gunaratana's very good book, 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness. This is his book on the Eightfold Path. So if you're interested in reading more or learning more about this, the Eightfold Path in general, this is a book I recommend. I'm not going to be following his lead exactly, but it's a good place if you want to learn more. And he calls this skillful mindfulness. So what is this right mindfulness in the Eightfold Path, or skillful mindfulness in Bhante Gunaratana's terms? Well, we can look to one early sutta on the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, perhaps the earliest or one of the earliest pieces of writing on a complete guide to meditation practice that we find in the world, really. And in this sutta, we find these, as I say, 4 foundations. Each one is directed at a different kind of subject matter. So we might say there are 4 different kinds of subject matter that we can turn our mind to during our mindfulness meditation. The first of these is mindfulness of the body. The second is mindfulness of feelings, which we'll get to all these in a moment. It's not really feelings in the sense of emotions, it's a different sense. The third of these is mindfulness of the mind. And the fourth of these is known as mindfulness of dharmas, which is sort of a large catch-all kind of word, a kind of concept, and again, we'll get to that in a moment. There's also indeed a separate complete sutta on mindfulness of breathing. I'm not going to be dealing with that sutta in today's video, but just to know that it is there, and in many ways follows the lead of the Four Foundations of Mindfulness here, although in a slightly different direction. I did a video about that one a while back, and I'll leave a link to that down in the notes. In these Four Foundations of Mindfulness, there are a large number of practices that are elaborated, and I'm not going to get to all of them here, but I do want to give you a flavor of what right mindfulness consists in. To begin with, we're asked in this sutta to approach mindfulness practice without desire or aversion, or as Bhante Sujato translates it, without covetousness and displeasure, but it's basically the same idea. That is, we're to come to our experiences non-judgmentally. Ordinarily, I should say this is a very tall order. Ordinarily, we come to our experiences with a great deal of judgment. A judgment through pleasure and displeasure. Certain kinds of experiences, certain kinds of things that arise in experience or the mind, we find pleasing, other things we find displeasing. So this covetousness, this wishing for the pleasing to continue, this displeasure, this wishing to push away what we find painful or unpleasant. So if we're practicing properly, if we're doing right mindfulness, we are approaching all of our experiences, again, with this kind of non-judgmental mind. And we might say, when judgment arises, when displeasure arises, when greed or covetousness arises, we might say, oh, in that case, I'm not doing right mindfulness. Well, it depends. We can also make that covetousness, make that displeasure, it's itself a focus of the mindfulness. So if we're able, in other words, we have a pleasant experience, maybe we smell something that's very enticing, someone's baking something, we feel that covetousness arise in the mind. We can make that covetousness an object of our mindfulness meditation and view that without judgment. And if we do that, then we're doing right mindfulness. However, if we view that covetousness with displeasure, as we're liable to do, we think, oh, I'm a good Buddhist practitioner, I'm a good mindfulness meditator, why is this covetousness still arising in my mind, that is viewing covetousness with displeasure, which itself then should become the object of our mindfulness. It's a kind of an iterative process. It's complicated. It gets, again, it can get very complicated as we allow the mind to see different aspects of how it's working. Another aspect of practice, among others, is to observe impermanence and change. In other words, not simply to attend to the things around us in our experience or in our mind, but to attend to their impermanence, to attend to the fact that they arise and fall, that they're not there always, that the pains and pleasures of a minute ago or yesterday or last year are different from the pains and pleasures of this moment or of today or of this year. So just to attend to that in our mindfulness is a key part of practice. So, but now to get to these four foundations themselves, we can begin with mindfulness of the body. In this case, the Buddha begins with mindfulness of breathing, which is, as I say, the sort of bedrock practice in Buddhism. It's the one that we sort of begin with, but one that continues throughout our experience, throughout our practice. Very, very accomplished meditators will continue with mindfulness of breathing. But that's not the only kind of mindfulness of the body. We should be aware of that. Some others include mindfulness of the various postures. So we can practice a mindfulness of sitting, simply being aware of the posture of sitting, being aware of the posture of standing, or lying down or walking. These are the four standard postures that are mentioned in this sutta. One of the really good practices that many of us will be aware of is mindfulness of walking or walking meditation. So in that case, in walking meditation, I've done videos on that as well. I'll leave a link to that down below in the notes if you want to learn more about that practice. But, in a nutshell, if we're doing mindfulness of walking or walking meditation, we're, instead of paying attention to the breath, we're paying attention to the movement of the body, and in particular to the touching of the feet on the ground. There, of course, we can pay attention to many things in walking meditations as just one example. Also, the Buddha recommends that we take this kind of mindfulness of the body out with us into the world. And this is an example of where mindfulness practice, at least ideally, is something that we continue with. It doesn't simply occur when we're in formal meditation, say on a cushion or on a chair, but rather is something that we persist in throughout our entire lives. Again, ideally, so that we're mindful of when we're out walking in town, perhaps going shopping. We're mindful when the Buddha even says, when you're going to the bathroom, you're mindful of that. So you're mindful in a certain sense at all times, and this is a body practice, so we're sort of mindful of the way our body is moving and what we're doing and where we're going and all the rest. The second of these four foundations of mindfulness is known as mindfulness of feelings. The Pali term here is Vedana, which doesn't really mean feelings in the sense of emotions, but rather in the psychological sense of what's known as valence or hedonic tone. Those are sort of big words that basically mean pleasures and pains. So that we pay attention in this kind of meditation, this kind of mindfulness, we pay attention to whatever pleasures or pains are arising in the moment. And again, we try to do so without attachment or aversion, simply non-judgmentally, simply being aware there's a pleasure arising, there's a pain arising. Now you might wonder, why is this important? Of all the things we could be paying attention to, why is it important to be paying attention to pleasures and pains arising? Why is that a key part of mindfulness practice? Well, it is because it's through pleasures and pains that craving is conditioned. Craving arises from pleasures, and the flip side of craving is aversion, which arises from pains. And it's through this kind of craving and aversion, through the second noble truth, that dukkha or suffering arises. So this is a key part of the Buddhist practice. This is a key part of the problem that we find in our lives, the arising of suffering. So by paying attention to simply the pleasures and pains themselves, we're going to get some key insights into where our suffering arises from. The Buddha also tasks us to pay attention to two different kinds of pleasures and pains. What we might call ordinary pleasures and what we might call spiritual pleasures, and ordinary pains and spiritual pains. Now, what's the distinction here? Well, our ordinary pleasures and pains are the ones that, again, we're probably most familiar with. The pleasure of smelling something delicious, the pain of stubbing our toe. These are generally understood to be sort of bodily pleasures and pains. Spiritual pleasure, on the other hand, is the sort of thing that we might say arises with a sense of freedom. So, for example, perhaps we are meditating on some subject matter that's been bothering us, and we have insight into it. We see it as impermanent. We see it as not something that's worth clinging to or being aversive towards. And that awareness causes us freedom, makes us happy. That is a kind of spiritual pleasure. It's quite different from smelling cookies or something. It's something deeper, we might say. And paying attention to the arising of spiritual pleasure is very useful along the path. It tells us that we're going in the right direction. And similarly, spiritual pains, perhaps they arise when we notice that we're not living up to our own expectations on some spiritual matter, on some matter of practice. Perhaps we've gotten angry in a way and lashed out at somebody with anger that we know we're better than that, that we shouldn't be doing that. That can cause us spiritual pain. Again, quite different from stubbing your toe. It's not a bodily pain, but it's a kind of a spiritual pain. So again, being aware of when that arises, that's an important part of our practice as well. The third of these foundations of mindfulness is mindfulness of mind. That is to pay attention to the character of our mind in general. Where is our mind sitting right now? So, for example, are we feeling greedy right now, needy? Are we feeling irritable or angry? Or are we feeling contented and equanimous? Is our mind scattered and distracted? Or is our mind calm and focused? These are differences that it's good to pay attention to and to be aware of when they arise in the mind, either one. Being aware of the arising and passing of such states allows us to have insight into perhaps what brings them into being. By being aware of our minds and knowing when our minds are distracted or angry or irritable or calm, we can begin to have insight again into the causes and conditions of those states so that we can pursue the ones perhaps that help us, that are skillful and healthy for us, and try to keep out or away those states that are less skillful, less healthy for us. Also, we can, in all this, pay attention to the impermanence of all these states of mind. They're coming and going. That will help us, again, gain insight into impermanence generally, but give us insight into the character of our minds, of how these arise, how long they stay. Perhaps we'll notice that they don't stay as long after we've been practicing for a while, and so on. Finally, the fourth of these foundations of mindfulness is known as mindfulness of dharmas, which is a sort of an awkward non-translation. Basically, this fourth category is a sort of a catch-all for our being aware of certain kinds of, we might say, Buddhist organizational principles of the mind. So, to begin with, there's awareness of the hindrances when they arise. These are states of mind that tend to hinder our achievements or our advancement in meditation. So, for example, things like being distracted or having doubts or being sleepy. There are 5 hindrances. I've done videos about these as well. Again, I'll leave relevant videos down below in the notes if you want to learn more. But being aware of when these hindrances arise is, of course, very important to us because it allows us to understand when things are not going to our advantage with our meditation. Perhaps there's something we can do to counteract these hindrances. There's also awareness of the 5 aggregates. This is, we meditate being aware of the way that our apparent self can be split up into 5 different kinds of things. To begin with, there's the body. That is what is known as the form aggregate. There are feelings, which you just talked about, these Vedana, these feelings, perceptions, volitions, and consciousness. These are the 5 aggregates. So we can perhaps practice with being aware of one or another of these 5 aggregates arising in our experience. Feeling a feeling at one point, feeling of volition arising, understanding consciousness of one kind or another arising, and so on. Then there's awareness of the senses and their various sense fields. So we have the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. There are 6 senses in traditional Buddhist understanding. So we can be aware of when not only the sense is active, but when there is something that we are sensing. So there's a sense and there is a sense field. These two interact with each other to produce consciousness of the way things are in that particular sense field. And that consciousness is usually associated with experiences of a certain kind that lead to our clinging. As we've discussed before, something pleasant arises through a sense field. We see something beautiful, we smell something that's delicious, we hear something that sounds nice, and we go towards it. And so in our mindfulness of these sense fields, we can become aware of the way that they grab us, that they sort of create, we might say, cords of attachment that pull us in. That can be part of our meditation practice with sense fields. And there's more besides discussed in mindfulness of dharmas. One of the key parts of it is mindfulness of the arising of the factors of awakening or enlightenment. I've done a video about that also, which I will leave a link to down below in the notes. It's again a little bit too much for me to get into here. It's a more advanced kind of awareness of the progress, of our sort of progress along the path as various important path factors arise during our practice. But that's another thing that we can pay attention to. So the point in all of this is that right mindfulness, this stage along the Eightfold Path, is an attitude we are really to take ideally to all of our experience all of the time. It is indeed an attitude of non-judgmentalism, but not for the mere sake of being non-judgmental. It's rather for the purpose of being able to see clearly and understand what is really skillful and unskillful for us. Because if we allow judgment to arise too quickly in our experience, we're liable to shut down that experience. We're liable not to be able to see it clearly, because we oftentimes will get in our own way. We will shut down any kind of thing that we don't want to hear about ourselves. And if we're not being mindful, that's the kind of thing we're prone to do. So right mindfulness really is all about being honest with ourselves, seeing the world clearly, and so being able to move about in that world in the most skillful manner. The next stage along the path, the final stage really, is right concentration, and I'll deal with that in the next video. When it's ready, I'll leave a link to it up here on the screen. Again, if you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked up here on the screen and down below in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel and the work that I'm doing here. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on that next video, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.